G'day everyone, thanks for tuning in to this talk. Today I'm going to provide an update about the Cumbre Vieja eruption, and I'm focusing on describing some of the efforts made to conduct responsive petrology and some of the lessons learned so far. And I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the incredibly international and collaborative team that has assembled itself almost out of nowhere throughout the last few months, and to say to those people that I really appreciate all of their efforts and that I'm looking forward to continuing this collaboration going forward. So the most important update I can give is that it seems to have stopped a few days before Christmas. Right now it's quiet, but there's still plenty of heat and gas coming out. So now you've had the update, I guess I've got another 7.5 minutes or so to tell you some other things. So this talk is going to be about the social, geological and operational context that we conducted this responsive petrology within. Some updates as to data that's coming in already, and some of the lessons in terms of those operations and methods and trials and tribulations as well. The Canary Islands are the only active volcanic region in Spain with numerous historic eruptions documented, and volcanic risk has been increasing for over 100 years because the population has increased markedly in that time. Volcanoes are still doing what they're doing, but there's more people on them, and in particular La Palma has been the most active in the last several hundred years. The active system on La Palma is called Cumbre Vieja, and in the last few hundred years eruptions have occurred kind of all over the place, and that matters in terms of hazard analysis and response. The products also have variations which are important on local spatial scales. Some magmas are more fluid than others, and this changes the hazard profile. So from a petrological perspective, it's really important to have this understanding, but also know what we're dealing with as soon as products start coming out. In the Canaries, the scientific advice committee that's assembled during volcanic crises is called PAVOLCA, and it's constituted from a number of national and local institutes. It's convened when a number of earthquakes per day hits a certain level, and so it's been convened in the past to respond to seismic crises and give advice to civil authorities. Of course, in this case, we had a week of seismicity and then an eruption began. Involcan responded to the seismic crisis by deploying soil gas and fluid geochemical teams to cover Cumbre Vieja in great detail, as well as installing and upgrading geophysical arrays. For the first few days, the data looked similar to other seismic crises that have been and gone, but when the earthquakes became more frequent, more intense and shallower, the possibility of an eruption increased, and on the Saturday, the petrology team decided to step up preparations for a response on the Monday. Even if an eruption didn't happen, we would learn something. From the petrology side, this was the situation on day one. The fact is there is no modern petrological instrumentation anywhere in the Canaries. There was no specific funding for Involcan equipment, consumables, accommodation or subsistence in terms of supporting a petrological response. The team is very small and unable to be working together on La Palma at any one time. And it's fair to say that the rest of the team at Involcan and INTO were already working 18, 20-hour days in response. There's also no petrological laboratory on Tenerife, although there is, or was at that time, equipment in boxes, and no base on La Palma. So what we could do was consider that we have lots of connections and networks and collaborators worldwide, and we could at very least try to go and get some of these rocks. So the idea was to create, as best we could, an open access rock library where the entire community could benefit. So that's what we set out to do. We threw as much equipment as we had to hand in the back of a van, including a tile saw for my builder mate. And we jumped on a ferry and set up at the municipal dam in their pump houses, and we stripped them and put our equipment in there. And within a couple of days, we had our first tephra station out, and we were collecting our Litoteca. What we endeavoured to do every day was to service as many of the tephra stations as we could. If there was active lava, we'd prioritise that. Take these volcanic products back to the lab, observe and characterise them, and start processing them for further analysis. And because all of that analysis was happening offshore, we tried our best to make it as easy as possible and as quick as possible for those on the receiving end. So that's the reason that we threw the 3D printer into the van at the very start, because we could start producing some mounts to help that process. On the left there's a EPMA mount. There's 13 stations there for different samples, and we can chop them into 2 bits, meaning we can retain one and send the other out. And on the right, there's a serial section box, and the cross-sectional area of those boxes matches what the ChemScan needs. So within a couple of weeks or so, we got the first base we occupied more or less up and running to the limit that it had. We're struggling for space. We were sharing with a lot of other teams as well, and that was the limitation. And within perhaps 5 weeks or so, we started looking around for somewhere a little larger as we were expanding, and found our second base, which I'll show you in a sec. Also, across the course of the eruption, there were different methods of actually gaining access to the places that we needed to. The first method was my favorite. It was approaching a control point with confidence and with an involcan jacket. The second, which was brought in a matter of days, unfortunately, was a piece of paper with a stamp. And then towards the end of the eruption, there were more sophisticated online forms to fill out, and it would spit out a QR code at you. And in the end, and we do think it's the end, thanks to a huge amount of effort by a huge amount of people, we've managed to create a Litoteca with over 100 lava samples that spans the entire eruption, as well as over 450 tephra samples from all over the island. And as for producing insightful petrological information to decision makers, observations were fed back to Volca via Involcan as and when required, and we also managed to produce a preprint 3 weeks after the eruption, day 0, with integrated ChemScan petrographic information and geochemical trends. So I think this demonstrates that petrology is not inherently slow, even when deployed from a standing start. But what is slow is everything around it, the logistics, the communication bottlenecks, red tape. But happily, these are the things that can be planned in advance. And perhaps the most gratifying conclusion is that, yes, you absolutely can count on your friends and colleagues. Thank you very much for that again.